real estate investing is one of the best ways to create wealth, but it's also one of the most litigious industries out there. There's even a saying that goes, if you haven't been sued yet, it just means that you haven't done enough deals. And if you lose a huge case, besides just losing the home itself, you might also lose everything you've ever worked for. So to prevent this disaster from happening, a lot of real estate investors create LLCs and trusts to keep their properties separate from their other assets. This way, you no longer own the property in your personal name. So you limit your liability, but you still maintain control of the asset. So you still get to make all the decisions and you get to keep all of the profits. But this whole process can be complicated. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to use entities to keep your assets safe, when's the best time to use them, and how we set up our own entities for asset protection. So before we get started, what exactly is an LLC? An LLC is a limited liability corporation. Now I know this may sound really scary or that you might need hundreds of thousands of dollars before you can open your own corporation, but in reality, an LLC is just an entity that can own assets and do business. And the whole point of creating one is so that if you get sued and you lose a judgment, the worst thing that can happen is that you'll lose everything in this one LLC, but everything outside of it is completely protected. Now, some people might be thinking, doesn't this mean I'm gonna lose my property and I'm giving it up to something else? And the answer is technically yes. You are giving up your property to your LLC and you are no longer the personal owner of that property. But since you're gonna be the manager of the LLC, you still maintain control of the property so you can still make all the decisions and you still get access to the profits, cash flow, and tax benefits. You're just removing that extra layer of liability in case of a bad lawsuit. Now, if you're just starting your real estate investing journey, or if you don't have too many assets, then realistically, you probably don't need an LLC. But once you have 4 or more properties, then the chance of something happening on one of your properties does increase dramatically. And as a real estate investor, things do happen. You are dealing with the physical world, so things do break and people do get hurt. And as a first layer of defense, what most people have is an insurance policy. And it'll cover a large amount of issues that may happen on a regular basis. So if someone trips and gets hurt on your property, or if they sue you for mold in your home, then the insurance policy should pay for most of those issues. But of course, in the worst case scenario, there are some cases that just go way far and beyond what a normal insurance policy can cover, like a death or a permanent handicap that happens because of your property. So as an example of a really bad lawsuit, imagine losing a $1 million lawsuit on a home that's only worth $100,000. After all the insurance payouts, you still may be on the hook for another $500,000. And if you sold the property for $100,000, then that still leaves you with $400,000 that you'd have to pay out of your own pocket. And that property is in your personal name, then they'll go for that money in your bank accounts, your stock portfolio, or other real estate you might own. And if after selling all that's not enough, then they might garnish your wages or go after your retirement benefits, like going after your social security. But if the property were an LLC, then the judgment would just be limited to whatever's in the LLC. After the insurance pays you off and you sell the home, then you'll just close the LLC and they can't go after anything else. Sure, it's going to be extremely traumatizing, but at least you're limiting your exposure. And likewise, if something happens in your personal life, like you got into a really bad car accident that was your fault and you got sued for $2 million, then they can go after everything that you own personally, but they won't be able to go after anything that's in an LLC. So basically, by being smart with how you place these things into different buckets and doing asset protection properly, you're separating everything that you own into different buckets so you don't lose everything in one big shot. But before you go about and opening a bunch of LLCs, let's go over some of the downsides first. One of the major cons is that most conventional lenders will not do loans for LLCs directly. So this means that you're not going to be able to get these really nice 30-year fixed loans with low interest rates through your LLC directly. They usually want you to buy the property under your own name and get the loan under your personal name first. Now that being said, what a lot of investors do is they buy the property with their own name, get the loan with their own name, then a few months down the line, they then transfer that property into the LLC anyway without telling the lender. Technically, lenders don't like it and they don't allow it, but in reality, as long as you keep making your payments, then they usually don't care. Another disadvantage is that creating all these LLCs isn't free and it's going to increase your overhead costs. By creating more entities, you also have more bookkeeping, which can also increase your CPA costs as well. And depending on what state you live in, there can be franchise costs for every LLC that you own as well. For example, in California, you have to pay $800 a year for every LLC that you have. So if you have 5 properties and you create an LLC for each of these properties, then every single year, you have to pay an additional $4,000 just for the franchise taxes alone. On top of that, every year there are state filing fees and registered agent fees. Right now, I'm paying around $250 for these fees every single year for every entity that we own, which actually adds up to a few grand every year. So when does it make sense to create an LLC? Like I mentioned earlier, you probably need 4 units or more before considering getting an LLC in the first place. Unless you already have a significant amount of assets outside of real estate, like if you already own a huge portfolio of stocks and cryptocurrencies or liquid cash, then you probably want to separate those funds from your real estate business. rentals. Otherwise, the cash flow that you're gonna get from just 1 or 2 rentals probably won't cover the cost and the extra overhead expense that you're gonna have from creating an LLC in the first place. But if you get to a place like us where we have dozens of properties and we also have a bunch of other assets outside of real estate, then it makes sense to protect yourself and pay the extra cost, because this extra cost is gonna be way cheaper than a lawsuit. Now, when it comes to actually creating the LLCs, there are many ways to do it. The first way is to try doing everything yourself using companies like LegalZoom. They don't charge too much and they will help you open an LLC. But the way I see it, the whole reason for creating these entities is to protect yourself from a lawsuit. So for me, if I'm gonna do this work, I wanna make sure that I'm doing it with someone who really knows what they're doing and make it as bulletproof as possible. So instead of going for the cheapest option, we went with a company called Anderson Advisors. Anderson Advisors is well known in the real estate investing community for helping them create entities for asset protection purposes. They've done it for tons of real estate investors, and they host these wonderful workshops on how to set your entities properly. And since working with them, they've helped us answer a ton of questions about entity structures, and they've even helped us open different types of entities and set up corporations that aren't even related to real estate. And yes, it did cost more than probably going with a company like LegalZoom, but when it came to protecting ourselves, we didn't want to use the cheapest option. It was kind of like deciding to go with a CPA who specializes in real estate investing versus trying to do our taxes by ourselves. And another cool thing about working with them is that you get access to their in-house attorneys for any small questions that you may have. And even though they might not give you like the best answer right off the bat from one phone call, at least they're going to give you a legal path forward so you know the best thing to do at the moment. So I really appreciate having that resource available while I was working with them. Anderson Advisors has been my go-to place for creating entities for my real estate properties. And if you guys are serious about wanting to create entities for asset protection purposes, then click on the link in the description to get a free 45-minute consultation with one of their advisors, where they'll review your entire situation and tell you what they think is best for you. So once you've created an entity, the next thing you need to do is transfer the properties into them. And to do this, all you have to do is call either your local title company or real estate attorney in that state where the property's in, and just tell them that you want to do a deed transfer and move the properties into the entities. They'll ask for your entity docs, like your operating agreement and your EIN, which is basically a social security number for businesses. And if you use a company like Anderson Advisors, they're going to give you all those documents, so you don't have to worry too much about that. And then from there, the title company or the attorney's office will do all the back-end paperwork and transfer the properties for you. And when you're doing this, make sure you tell them that you're not selling the property, you're just transferring it for asset protection purposes, so it shouldn't trigger any property tax reassessments. So how much does this all cost? Transferring a property into an LLC costs around $100 per property, but the cost of creating an LLC varies wildly depending on what service you use. So some of them only cost $100 or $200 to create, whereas other companies may charge $1,000 or $2,000. For us, we went with a plan with Anderson Advisors where we paid a fixed amount of money to create an unlimited amount of entities, whether that be S Corp, C Corps, trusts, etc. And from there, we created several WSTs, which are Wyoming Statutory Trusts, put our properties in there, and then all of those trusts are owned under one giant LLC. And then that one giant LLC creates a new bank account, which then collects all the rents and pays all the bills. We also pay around $200 for every entity every single year for the registered agent fees, and another $100 every year for the state filing fees. And like I mentioned earlier, depending on where you live or where the LLC is incorporated, you may need to pay franchise tax fees, which can be several $100s for every LLC that you own. So just be aware of how much the back end and recurring fees are going to be, because even closing an LLC costs money too. Now overall, having an entity is incredibly important if you have multiple properties or if you already have a lot of assets that are at risk. But before you get to that point, having a really good insurance policy should be good enough to cover for most of the major incidents that happen to your property. Now if you guys got this far, you definitely want to check out this video over here, where we're talking about everything you need to know about getting real estate insurance. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time. Take care.